For Ranger David Mbeki, the Masai Mara was not just a reserve. It was a living, breathing sanctuary he had devoted his life to protecting. For 16 years, he had walked its trails, memorized its rivers, and listened to its heartbeat. Day and night, he patrolled with his partner, a black Labrador named Kano. Kano was no ordinary companion. Strong, loyal, and unshakably brave, he had grown up on the reserve beside David. Where David went, Kano followed. Together they had tracked poachers, freed animals from snares, and witnessed both the cruelty and beauty of the wild. But one season, nature itself turned hostile that a week-long storm lashed across the savanna. The sky stayed heavy and iron gray, lightning splitting it open again and again. The Mara River, normally calm, rose into a furious torrent. Trees cracked and toppled. Earth collapsed in landslides. The flood swallowed entire stretches of land, leaving both humans and animals in peril. Ranger teams split into small groups, racing across dangerous routes to check vulnerable areas and rescue stranded wildlife. David drove his dented green pickup along a muddy track, windshield wipers fighting to keep up. Kano sat upright in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the glass, ears pricked as if listening to something beyond the storm. The wind howled. Rain hammered. Suddenly Kano barked, short, sharp, urgent. His muscles tensed. David glanced left, then right, but saw only a wall of murky water crashing through the trees. Before he could react, Kano leapt out through the half-open window. Kano! David's voice cracked with panic as he slammed the brakes and jumped out into the storm. His boots sank in mud as he chased after his dog, heart pounding by the time he reached the riverbank, his breath caught in his throat. Kano was in the water, black body cutting through the current with fierce determination. Then David saw wide out a lion cub, golden, fragile, no more than 3 months old. It bobbed helplessly in the torrent, paws flailing, muzzle barely above the surface. Its eyes were wide with terror, its mewling cries swallowed by the thunder. Each time the current pulled it under, it surfaced weaker, closer to surrender. David's blood ran cold. The cub wouldn't survive another minute. Kano surged forward, his body thrown about by waves, yet his eyes stayed locked on the tiny life ahead. He growled low, forcing his way closer with each powerful stroke. David ran along the bank, shouting into the storm, desperate but powerless. "Go, Kano! Hold on!" The cub slipped under again, gone. But Kano dove, jaws finding the scruff of its neck just as a mother lioness would. His grip was gentle yet firm, holding the cub above the surface. The river roared in protest, dragging both downriver. Kano's body shuddered with exhaustion, but he kicked on, each stroke slower but determined. The cub dangled limply from his jaws, too weak to resist. Almost there, David yelled, stumbling down the mud-slick bank. He crouched, stretching his arms out desperately. "Come on, boy, just a little closer." At last, Kano's paws scraped the shallows. David lunged forward, grabbing his dog by the scruff and heaving them both onto solid ground. Mud splashed. The storm raged on. Kano collapsed, chest heaving, still holding the cub. Only when David touched him did he release it. The cub flopped onto the mud, limp and lifeless. For one heart-stopping moment, David thought it was over. Then, a faint breath. Weak, fragile, but real, David dropped to his knees, cradling the sodden cub. "You're alive," he whispered. He fumbled for his radio. "This is Ranger Mbeki. South Bend of the Mara, lion cub, critical. Send the vet unit now." He wrapped Kano in his jacket, pressing him against his chest. The Labrador trembled violently, eyes glazed with fatigue, but his gaze remained fixed on the cub. Even half-drowned, Kano refused to look away. The rescue vehicle arrived minutes later, skidding to a halt. Veterinarians rushed forward, lifting the cub onto a stretcher. In the floodlit veterinary ward, the air filled with the smell of antiseptic and wet fur. Bright lamps shone as doctors worked urgently. They drained water from the cub's lungs, checked its faint heartbeat, massaged its chest until, at last, it gave a weak cough and blinked its amber eyes open. Relief swept through the room. Kano, meanwhile, lay on a dry blanket as another vet examined him. Exhausted but alive, only scratches and strained muscles. When the cub let out a weak mewl, Kano's ears perked, his head lifting despite his exhaustion. He whined softly, tail-thumping. Doctor Aisha Mwangi, the lead vet, turned to David with a weary smile. He's fragile, but he'll live. Your dog saved him. David dropped his gaze to Kano, stroking his damp fur. His voice cracked with pride. You're more than a dog, boy. You're a hero. The cub was named Tay, meaning he has been seen. At first, Tay cowered in his enclosure, eyes filled with fear. He hissed and hid in corners whenever anyone approached. But Kano refused to leave his side. Day after day, he lay outside the enclosure, tail wagging slowly, giving gentle whines of reassurance. Then, one afternoon, Tay crept closer. The cub sniffed cautiously, then pressed his head against Kano's fur through the bars. Kano licked him gently, and the fear in Tay's eyes softened. David stood nearby, overcome with emotion. In that quiet moment, predator and dog had chosen each other. From then on, they became inseparable. As Tay's health returned, he followed Kano's every move. When he stumbled while climbing a log, Kano barked in encouragement. When he got a scrape, Kano licked his wound until David bandaged it. Slowly, trust bloomed where fear once lived. Other rangers came to watch, shaking their heads in disbelief. A lion and a dog, one murmured, and they act like brothers. Months rolled by. Tay grew strong. His golden coat gleamed under the sun, muscles rippling as he leapt and climbed. David began guiding him through recovery training, chasing dangling bait, stalking silently, testing his strength on climbing structures. Kano was always near, barking encouragement, running alongside the fence as though coaching him. Many times, the two raced side by side, lion cub and Labrador, two species bound by something deeper than instinct. But David knew this bond could not last forever. Tay was born for the wild. His destiny lay under the open African sky, among the prides that ruled the savannah. 6 months later, the day of farewell arrived. Tay was no longer a helpless cub. His frame was powerful, his eyes fierce yet steady. The transport truck waited, its cage door open. David brought Kano along. The young lion bounded forward, rubbing his head against Kano's neck, releasing a deep rumble of affection. Kano wagged furiously, whining as if pleading not to part. The two pressed close, exchanging their last wordless vows. David swallowed hard, his throat burning. You've done your part, boy. You gave him life. Now we have to let him go. As the vets guided Tay into the transport, he paused. His amber gaze lingered on Kano, as though carving his image into memory. Then, with a final low roar, he stepped inside. The truck rolled away, vanishing into the horizon where the savannah stretched endless and free. Kano sat motionless, staring after it. Then he lifted his head and let out a long, mournful bark that echoed across the plains. David knelt beside him, hand resting on his back. His voice was soft but certain. We gave him back to the wild, Kano. And you gave him a miracle. The storm that had once threatened life had instead forged a bond that defied the rules of nature. A ranger, a dog, and a lion cub, forever linked by one impossible rescue, and by love that crossed every boundary of species.